Hello everyone and welcome to the channel for the official review of the SVBONY SV503 70ED telescope. Now, we do have a lot to discuss regarding the features, the price, the pros, the cons, the telescope, and we're also going to be checking out the Bode Galaxy and Cigar Galaxy with this telescope in this video with a DSLR camera. So if you want to know some of the features and know if this telescope is a good fit for you, make sure you stay tuned for the rest of the video. So there's a lot of different things that I really like about this telescope. Of course, one of the big things being the hooded lens. Now, the reason that the hooded lens is very important for me, since I do live in a busy city area, I'm sure you could hear the car that just now went by. I have a lot of headlights, there's street lights that's pretty much lighting up my entire area. This lens cap, this hooded lens, basically blocks out all of that. I don't have to worry about passing cars, I don't have to worry about street lights that could cause a glare on the lens of my telescope, because I know that I can just extend that and have it covered. So it's definitely a big plus for me since I do live in a city, and I'm sure it'll be a big plus for everyone who does live near a busy road or near a busy city who don't want a whole lot of light hitting the lens of their telescope, because that's definitely going to mess up your astrophotography. So that's a big plus for me. Now, another thing that I really like, of course, is the dual speed focuser. Now, the dual speed focuser is extremely handy for you to be able to achieve perfect focus. You use a bigger knob, you turn it in order to achieve focus quicker, then you can use the smaller knob in order to find that perfect focus that you want for your astrophotography image, because focus is one of the most important things for astrophotography to come out looking nice. So after you're done using your focus, you can also turn the little knob at the bottom, as I just now showed you. And turning that little knob is going to lock that in, so you don't have to worry about the focus slipping over time as you're doing your astrophotography session. Now, another thing I like, of course, is the customizability. It does have these two rings. As you can see, I have them very close together, and the reason for that is for me to have more of a balance. Since this is a DSLR camera, it's kind of heavy, to basically balance out the telescope for my little mount that I have here. And speaking of it being a little mount, that's another thing that I do like about this telescope, of course, is the fact that it's extremely lightweight. As you know, the Skywatcher Star Adventure 2i has a payload capacity of about 11 pounds, I believe is what it was. And even with the DSLR camera and this telescope and the finder scope that I have on here, it does not pass that payload. So it's definitely a big thing for me, and I'm sure for a lot of different people who are just getting started with astrophotography. You don't have to worry about it being too heavy for your mount, because if it's too heavy for your mount, obviously it's going to have more of a hard time tracking. But also, if you're a beginner astrophotographer, you can use it on a smaller mount like this, so you don't have to break the bank trying to get a go-to mount, because obviously this can be used as just a good introductory into astrophotography, or even if you do have your bigger advanced mount, you can use this for it. It'll work amazing, it'll work great. And you shouldn't have any kind of problem with it, just because it's such a lightweight and compact refractor telescope. So that's something extremely handy for me, since I do only have the Sky Adventure 2i, and I'm sure it would definitely come in handy for those who are, again, just getting started into astrophotography and don't have the money to get such a big, heavy-duty go-to mount. Now, there is a downside I will have to say about it. Of course, you can see it in this frame that I'm showing you up here. It does have a slight amount of chromatic aberration, but that's not something you should have to worry about too much, as that can be gotten rid of with deconvolution in Serial or PixInsight, or you can just do some slight editing in GIMP in order to get rid of that chromatic aberration, at least the majority of it. Now, talking about the price, this is not a telescope that you're going to have to break the bank over, of course. There is one slight downside to this telescope, again, that being the fact that it generally is recommended to use the SVBONY field reducer, which I do have the link to that in the description of this video, and I also have the link to the camera that I'm using and the telescope in the description of the video as well, if you're interested in buying. The field reducer is definitely going to reduce the amount of weird star distortion that you will see around your image. Of course, if you're mainly focused on a deep sky object that's smaller and more centered in your image, you don't have to worry about that field reducer so much. But the field reducer is definitely going to have a big impact on your images, as it will reduce the focal length, allowing the light to get to your sensor quicker. It'll allow it to gather quickly. You don't have to use as much exposure time. So I definitely would recommend using the field reducer, but that it is an extra $150 to $200 added on to this $350, I believe, telescope. So it is a slight downside that some might find, having to buy an extra accessory in order for the telescope to be more practical. Of course, it doesn't require that. It's extremely usable without it. As you can see, I'm using that without it right now to photograph Bode's Galaxy and Cigar Galaxy, and you will see that the image is still going to come out nice. So you don't have to worry about that too much, but it's definitely something I would recommend. Now, another thing that I do really like about this telescope, of course, going back to the fact that it's customizable, it does have these little knobs for you to add attachments. As you can see, well, you can't see it, but I do have the finder scope right here. Since it's not a go-to mount, I do need a finder scope. I have my little SVBONY red dot finder, which does work great, and it doesn't add hardly any weight to the telescope, which is also pretty handy. But you can add a variety of attachments to it, using either a camera guide scope, or you can add your cameras here. You can put your ZWO AS-Air Mini or Pro on here. You can mount that on there as well. So there's a variety of things that you can do with it. You can customize it to however you like it. So the fact that it is very customizable, it does come with a dovetail plate as well. I'm not sure if I had mentioned that before. So you can use it with pretty much virtually any kind of mount, whether it's just your simple star tracker or a heavy-duty go-to telescope mount. Just the amount of different things that you can do with it. You're not confined to just using it for one thing. However, I do have to mention, it's not recommended for planetary due to its shorter focal length. But other than that, I'm really excited to use this telescope. I do think it's pretty good. Definitely a good bang for your buck. It's a great telescope for the price. And I'm excited to see what we can do with the Bode's Galaxy and the Cigar Galaxy on here as well. So if you're interested in seeing the results and what you're actually able to get with this telescope using a DSLR and limited amount of exposure time due to the fact clouds are going to come in soon, make sure you stay tuned for the rest of the video. But I definitely will say I would give this telescope probably an 8.5 out of 10, just due to the fact that it's an amazing telescope, but it does have some slight limitations. So let's allow this to run for a while, and we will come back to once it is done getting its exposures. So one thing I actually did realize I had forgotten to include before we move the files to the computer is the fact that this does in fact have a rotatable focus tube. So if you want to get the perfect field of view with your DSLR, whatever camera it is that you have, all you have to do is loosen this knob right here, and you can rotate this to whatever angle you would like it to be. All right, so we have all the files here now on PC. As you can see, I do have M81, M63, and the Whirlpool Galaxy on here because I did manage to get 3 different galaxies over a period of 2 nights, about 4 hours of exposure time each, with my Canon Rebel T7 DSLR camera. Now, I will say one mistake I did make on the Whirlpool Galaxy was that it was not perfectly in focus. So the stars aren't going to be as sharp as I would like it, but we still are going to see what we can do with it. Again, this is kind of just a test run for what the aperture of this telescope can do with just a DSLR camera. Of course, there's a lot of different cameras that are sold both by SVBONY, ZWO, a lot of different companies. Those cameras could potentially get higher resolution than my DSLR camera did, allowing you to see more details, perhaps more coloration. But we're going to see what the DSLR was able to pull out with this awesome telescope. And just seeing the stacked files that I've gotten so far, I'm pretty impressed. The unedited versions, I'm pretty excited for what we have here. So we're going to start with M81. As you can see, I have my darks, bias, flats, and lights all stacked together. And here is the M81 fit file. So we're just going to drag this into Serial. All right, so as you can see, Serial is now open. So we're just going to switch this to auto stretch, and we're going to run through a very basic run through for processing this. So it's auto stretch, obviously, is the first thing we do. We're going to link this. And what I was talking about with requiring the field reducer, obviously the center of the image is fine. So if you're going to be using this telescope on perhaps a smaller deep sky object, you can either use a Barlow lens, which I honestly wouldn't recommend with the aperture of the telescope since it isn't a very big aperture. But you could use a Barlow lens to get higher zoom, or just don't use a field reducer or flattener, the one that SVBONY sells, so that you can get a higher amount of resolution on these deep sky objects. Honestly, you don't need that field reducer if you're doing it kind of centered. As you can see, this one, the stars are only bloated and elongated on the outsides of the image, but here on the center, everything's perfectly sharp the way we would want it to be. So we're just going to go ahead and crop this, just like that, where the stars are nice and sharp. You see it's cropped. You don't see any elongation on any of these stars. So, again, just to get started with this, we're going to do our background extraction. We're going to generate that. Of course, that's we need to lower down this grid tolerance a bit. Generate it again. Lower down some more. Generate it again. Add some little samples up here in the corner because we want to make sure everything is nice and even. So just like this, we do our samples. Once you have a sufficient amount of samples, you just go ahead and compute background here. If you're happy with how it did, you go ahead and hit the apply button. Now let's switch it to the image processing again. We're going to do our color calibration. Now for the color calibration, you don't want to do photometric color calibration. If you do photometric, it's going to end up getting rid of a lot of the natural coloration of the galaxies. So let's just do our normal color calibration for this. Manual. We just select this part of the sky where there's no stars or anything. We use that as a current selection, and then we zoom out again. We select this part of the galaxy just like that. Use current selection. Let's neutralize the background here, and then hit apply, and it should calibrate these colors correctly. Again, it's going to take a little bit. It shouldn't take long, but once it's done, you can hit the close button, and it should be done. So we're going to switch it to auto stretch. Make sure we center that. And now let's get rid of the green noise here. Remove green noise. Apply on that. Hit close, and now it is properly calibrated. And just to check, make sure that we got everything correct. Let's move this to the side console. Let's see. Yes, it did the color calibration correctly. So now what we're going to do is get rid of the stars here. So we go to image processing. We do our star processing, star net, star removal, and we allow that to run. Just pre-stretch and make sure you have it switched back to linear mode. Hit execute here, and it should only take a minute. All right, as you can see, that is now done. We can switch this to auto stretch just to see how it looks. It's looking okay for now. So let's switch it back to linear mode. We're gonna do a quick denoise on this. Let's see, noise reduction. Hit apply here. It's gonna denoise real quick, and then we'll switch it back to auto stretch to see if it did it correctly. Hit close here and auto stretch. It looks like it did some denoising. It doesn't make much of a difference, but it did help a little bit. So let's switch it back to linear mode. Now, instead of using the generalized hyperbolic stretch, we're going to use the ascend transformation for our stretch. Honestly, this does work better with galaxies. It helps preserve the coloration a lot. So to do this, we just bump up the stretch factor a bit. You don't want to overdo it because you also need to bump up the black point. You're basically just going to be doing it little by little. It's kind of like clipping the black point on the histogram. But again, you're going to be playing around with this, seeing what works best, seeing what doesn't. And each time you're just going to apply, and you're just going to do it over and over again until you're happy with how your transformation is looking. So I'm just going to bump this up more. Obviously, that's too much. I'm just going to lower it down. Bump up this black point again. All right, so I'm happy with how this is looking so far. You can honestly see a lot of the detail on these galaxies. You can see the banding of it, which is pretty cool. You can't see it with things like these smart telescopes. It doesn't work as well with that. You see a lot of detail on this galaxy here. Of course, it probably would have worked better had I used a Behitnov mask, I'm pretty sure is what it's called, in order to really get that perfect focus. I wasn't able to achieve that, despite the fact that it does have that dual speed focuser. Had I had that Behitnov mask, it would have made that focus perfect. And with that dual speed focuser that this SVBONY SV503 70ED telescope has, would have been able to achieve that perfect focus even faster. But I do need to make sure I get my hands on one of those. But this is pretty cool. The details are nice and sharp, and I really like how it's looking so far. So we're going to save this. Now let's go to our color saturation and kind of bump this up. Obviously, you don't want to oversaturate the image. So we're just going to bump it up a bit. We're going to reduce the background factor here, lower it down just a little bit more, and hit apply. And this is looking pretty good. So we're going to take our stars and bring that back in here. So make sure you save it before you do the star recomposition. It is star processing, star recomposition. We get our starless file, starless M81, and we bring it in with our star mask file. Now let's start bringing these stars in. Obviously, you don't want to overstretch these stars here. And now I'm going to show you a little bit of the issue I had with the optics. Obviously, the optics are pretty good for doublet APO. You don't see too much chromatic aberration, but if you zoom in here, you do see this kind of purple tinge around the brighter stars, and that is a result of the chromatic aberration from a doublet lens. Obviously, it would work better with a triple APO, but that's what happens when you have a more budget telescope. Of course, this telescope so far for me is absolutely incredible, definitely for the price range. You don't have to have that field reducer to get this amount of detail. Obviously, you can have a more zoomed in image. If you don't have that field reducer, I would definitely recommend that more for nebulas or wider field astrophotography, like maybe objects in the Milky Way, or maybe you want to get two different objects in the same frame. Of course, if you use that field reducer, it's going to lower down the resolution that you have on those deep sky objects. So it's a lot of stuff that you have to keep in mind. But I think this looks really good. I'm pretty excited so far, definitely with the M81 result. Now let's check out the results for M63. All right, so we have M63 open now. Let's go ahead and do our auto stretch. Now I do want to clarify, this one only had about 3 or 4 hours of exposure, so it's really not a lot. So honestly, the fact that we're able to see this much so far is pretty impressive. It's pretty incredible. I like it. I really like it, especially in comparison to, again, smart telescopes that I have. The Dwarf 2 wasn't really able to achieve stuff like this. It would kind of just look like a blob. Even with a higher resolution sensor, definitely a higher amount of megapixels in it, it didn't look as good as this. So definitely the SVBONY SV503 does have a higher superiority to those smaller deep sky objects, and it's definitely more of a fraction of the price if you're not including the camera with it. So I do like what I'm seeing so far. Let's get through with the post-processing, and we will take a look at this final image. So again, we're going to run through this pretty simple. Let's crop this first. Now, to get the proper amount of the proper rotation, we're just going to rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. Yes, so we're going to go to geometry here. Let's rotate 90 degrees clockwise. Perfect. Let's do our background extraction, and we're just going to speed through this again. Generate that, compute background here. It'll even that out nicely, hit apply. Next we go to our color calibration, and we do this again. We do it all manually, definitely in galaxies. If you try to do it with nebula, it's not going to come out that pretty. I would definitely recommend using the photometric if you're doing nebula, but with this one, definitely would recommend that you do the manual color calibration if you're doing it on galaxies. So hit apply there, hit close. Again, you want to make sure that it actually did it properly. So let's check that. Color calibration processing done. Awesome. Let's do our remove green noise. Hit apply here. Hit close here. Next, we'll switch it back to linear mode, and let's get rid of those stars. Let's save that. Again, star processing, StarNet, and pre-stretch, and hit execute. All right, so as you can see, the pre-stretch is now done. Let's save this one. Let's go to our image processing and again our ascend transformation because we are doing a galaxy. Let's bump up the stretch factor, obviously not too much, but a good amount, and bring up the black point as well. Obviously, you want to make sure you don't overdo it because that's going to basically clip off too much of your data, which you're going to need. So we hit apply here, and let's do that again. Our ascend transformation, bump it up some more, obviously not too much, maybe 1 or 2. And we can bring up this black point a good amount to get that proper black background that we want. So you don't want to over darken that background. So we're going to save it just like this. So hit apply here. The galaxy is pretty defined. You can see a lot of details on this galaxy, and honestly, you can already see some of this coloration in here. But let's bump up that saturation some. So bring this up here.
Obviously, you can see the center kind of glow nice and yellow, how it actually is. Hit apply, and let's bring it up a tiny bit more. There we go, and hit apply. Now, I will say the galaxy probably would have been brighter had I gotten more exposure time than I did this time, but this does look pretty good, in my opinion. But let's bring the stars back in here, do our star processing and star recomposition, and do the starless result, and our star mask result. Hit open here. Let's bring the stars back in. Again, not too bright, just bright enough. And hit apply, hit close. And honestly, there's not too much chromatic aberration in this image. The galaxy is looking beautiful. I can't say that I'm not impressed with this telescope. It's definitely a very small aperture, but it's still able to pull out a whole lot of details, even at this focal length in this amount of exposure time. Only 4 hours for a more dim galaxy is very, very good. So I do find that pretty impressive so far. Again, I'm really liking what I'm seeing with this telescope. So let me go ahead and save this as a unique file. And I'm just going to do a quick run through on the Whirlpool Galaxy. I'm not going to show the whole process because I know that it is somewhat blurry, as I mentioned before, and we will come back and take a look at the final results of all of them. All right, so all three of the deep sky objects have been processed now, and now it's time to take a look at what we were able to pull out with this telescope. So let's start with M63. Now, obviously, there's a huge amount of detail in here for the amount of exposure time that it had. Honestly, one of my first thoughts when I saw the telescope is that it was not going to have a wide enough aperture to really be able to capture enough light to be able to do these kind of shorter exposures. Again, these were only 60 seconds exposures at ISO 1600, and personally, I didn't believe it would be enough, but it definitely way outdid my ideas. The aperture of 70 inches with this focal length was honestly perfect for just about any kind of deep sky object out there, including dark nebula, which I'm really looking forward to trying out again in a later video. Definitely when I have more clear skies. For M63, I'm very impressed with what we were able to pull out. Obviously, there's a lot of detail here in this picture. Again, I probably should have used that Behitnov mask in order to get that perfect focus. There is a tiny bit of chromatic aberration, but when you're really focused on the center of this picture, you don't see that much. It doesn't really bother you that much, and you still end up with a very nice, beautiful image. Now, taking a look at M81, obviously there's a whole lot of detail here. Again, this was not very much exposure time, but the amount of detail in this picture is amazing. Clearly, the optics are very, very nice, despite the fact that, again, there's a small amount of chromatic aberration, but that can be ignored or eventually fixed in programs like GIMP or even PixInsight. I'm pretty sure there's a way to get rid of it on there, but on GIMP, you can kind of just desaturate the stars here. But again, it's not really an issue for me, especially when you're really focused on that center image. You don't really have to worry about the elongation on the sides of the pictures as well, because you can kind of just center it in, especially if you plan on photographing these smaller deep sky objects such as galaxies or smaller nebula that are out there. It's definitely a good choice for you, especially if you're on a budget for your astrophotography. Again, the whole setup that I have is only about, I'd say, $1,000, including the camera, the mount, and the telescope itself, which is definitely a very, very cheap setup. So this telescope is definitely lightweight, portable, and I really recommend it, especially for astrophotography. Now let's take a look at the last one. Again, this one did come out a little bit blurry, as you can see kind of from the stars here. I did not achieve perfect focus, but it's still able to pull out a crazy amount of detail from these galaxies here. But let me know what you guys think about it in the comments. Personally, I would highly recommend this telescope, especially if you're a beginner astrophotographer or even an experienced astrophotographer who wants more of a small telescope that's going to be lightweight and more portable. I definitely recommend this to just about anyone, especially the other SVBONY telescopes as well. The SVBONY 503 is definitely a good selection of telescopes that you need to add to your collection. So the link to it, if you want to purchase it, it is below in the description of the video. It will take you to their actual website, the SVBONY website. Sorry, I'm very used to saying the other company's name. I usually do videos for them. But again, I'm highly impressed with what this telescope is able to pull out. But let me know what you guys think personally in the comments. If you did enjoy the video, if this video did help you make a decision on this telescope, make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and stay tuned for future content. But I hope you all have clearer skies than I currently have right now, and I wish you all a great night.